Today on RoxomTV News. Now, new FBI files say Donald Trump told police in 2006 that everyone knew about Epstein, which raises one very uncomfortable question. Who exactly was everyone? Sam Bankman-Fried wants a new trial because apparently 25 years in prison is something you at least tried to return with the receipt. But first, a small Canadian town is left reeling after a deadly school shooting. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it.
I understand that there are 10 people in total who are dead, two different sites. 8 of the people who died as a result of the shootings were at the school, including an individual we understand is the suspected shooter, who is believed to have died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Tragedy has unfolded in Tumbler Ridge, a remote town in Canada with roughly 2,700 people. At least 10 people are dead and more than 24 wounded after a shooter opened fire at a high school and a nearby residence yesterday afternoon. One student who survived the attack spoke with CBC News. Let's listen in.
I was just getting off my spare block and I was in the mechanics classroom preparing to do some work on my car when the alarm went off that I've never heard before. And our principal goes throughout the halls and she's saying, people close your doors, lock down, stuff like that. I thought it was a secure and hold and something like that at first. But once things started circulating, we realized how serious it really was. So we all barricaded up the doors with some iron tables and sat in that room for around 2 hours. I was on my phone with my mother the entire time. And about 2 hours and 30 minutes passed when we went onto lockdown. Our CMP got in. We're telling everyone to put their hands up, and we were all escorted out of the building and sent towards the community center where I met up with her in person.
Now, officers found 6 victims dead within the building and several others critically injured, including 2 who were airlifted to a hospital. One additional victim died while being transported for medical care, and authorities later discovered 2 more victims at a home believed to be connected to the suspect. Now, the suspected shooter, described by investigators as a female wearing a dress, was found dead at the scene from what authorities say appears to be a self-inflicted injury. Officials say the motive here remains unclear. School shootings are statistically rare in Canada, which has stricter gun laws than the United States, and this attack is already being described as one of the deadliest in modern Canadian history and has drawn comparisons to the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre. And for those of you watching at home, this matters beyond national borders, as it raises questions about school safety, mental health resources, community preparedness, and whether even small, tightly connected towns are insulated from the kinds of violence that dominate global headlines. All right, joining me this morning to talk about this story and others, the next story. We're moving on to the next story. Okay, it's a live show. Things happen. All right, we're going on to our next story of this morning, gang, that's taking place in Venezuela as energy policy is taking a sharp turn. As you see, the United States issued a license allowing oil and gas exploration and production in Venezuela. Or, in plain English, American companies can now provide goods, technology, and services to help revive Venezuela's oil sector, though payments must flow through U.S. supervised funds and new joint ventures remain off limits. Now, at the same time, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright arrived in Venezuela, marking the highest level American energy visit there in nearly 3 decades. He met with interim President Delcy Rodriguez, energy officials, and executives from Chevron, Repsol, and others who see opportunity where there has been stagnation. Officials believe crude output, currently near 1 million barrels per day, could rise by up to 20% with investment in technical support. There is also a $2 billion oil supply deal and a $100 billion reconstruction plan aimed at rebuilding infrastructure weakened by years of underinvestment and sanctions. And here's where things get a little little more interesting. The U.S. license excludes Russian and Chinese entities, prompting Moscow to seek clarification, and Russia's Rozar Berezhneft has stated it remains committed to its Venezuelan holdings. So this is not only about drilling more oil, it's about who controls the flow of that oil and who has leverage in Latin America. And why this should matter to you is because every energy policy shows up in fuel prices, inflation numbers, and global supply chains. If Venezuela ramps up successfully, it could ease pressure at the pump. We're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by the man that can connect the dots like no one else, Nolan Bauerle, to break down more of this morning's top stories. So stay tuned. Roxom TV News coming right back after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index is collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
All right, welcome back to Roxom TV News. I'm joined by Nolan Bauerle to talk about our last story about what's going on in Venezuela. Nolan, happy Wednesday. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
I love life. I'm enthusiastic about the future of humanity, including the future of Venezuela.
Oh, well, I'm excited to hear that you're enthusiastic and excited and feeling good about it. Because my first question, Nolan, is, we're hearing about the United States reopening part of Venezuela's oil sector. What's the real objective here? Is this primarily about lowering energy prices, or is this more about strategic positioning in Latin America? Because that's kind of the general vibe I'm getting right now, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the clues to it were actually in the Bad Bunny halftime show when you saw Bad Bunny with the electrical infrastructure and it wasn't working in Puerto Rico. But then he talked about how America was from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, and that it was all of these American countries, American nations. So what we're seeing are the elements of the Dunro Doctrine. The Dunro Doctrine came out of the Bad Bunny halftime show. And what we're seeing in Venezuela is more or less that. We're seeing American infrastructure become economically and commercially tied in. Of course, the Texas oil, what do they call it again when they refine it? The refineries, all the Texas refineries were already calibrated for Venezuelan crude a generation ago. And when the beginning of the Chavez regime began, they had to get supply from elsewhere because these are the types of crude that Venezuela produces that they were going to be able to refine in Texas. So now you're going to start to see all of this infrastructure go back to the way it was designed to function in the first place, to treat the Gulf of America itself as a huge oil basin and to have it all economically tied. Puerto Rico itself is part of that, right? Puerto Rico is part of access to this whole Caribbean. Another reason why Cuba is coming under a lot of scrutiny right now. Cuba, of course, in big, big trouble with their own capacity to feed their people. And I saw, before I went live on my show, I saw the story in El Paso about the airspace being closed, and there's a 10-day cessation of operations at the airport, the commercial airport. So El Paso, I think in the top 30 overall U.S. cities in terms of population. It's right on the border with Mexico. A lot of people think, I don't know what's happened in the past 2.5 hours, but my understanding is the El Paso story and the 10 days of ending all commercial flights are related to Mexican cartels, which is
Oh,
related to the Cuban situation, which is related to the Venezuelan situation. It's all one big story. So what you're seeing in Venezuela is, I think, what people hope to see in Cuba in the next few weeks, because Cuba is in worse shape than ever. I think Cuba's lost something like 20% of its population in the past 5 years,
wow.
because there's just no jobs, there's nothing going on. And now there's no more commercial flights as of yesterday to Cuba because they don't have jet fuel for the airplanes to
Right.
go back. So that's part of this whole story.
Yeah, and that's why I love having you on the show, Nolan, to help connect all of those dots because we know this is not isolated to just Venezuela, but kind of honing back in on Venezuela itself, right? If they successfully were able to increase the output of their oil production, who actually benefits first here? Is it Venezuelan government, the people, or is it maybe American consumers and U.S. oil companies? Like, who ultimately stands to benefit the most from them getting these oil refineries up and running at full speed?
I don't know what the royalty deal looks like already. I doubt the government of Venezuela is getting the benefit here. If it
Hmm.
looks anything like the Guyanese deal next door, so Guyana, if you didn't know, Guyana has just found one of the largest oil reserves in the world, and
Oh.
it's not even close. And in fact, Venezuela was threatening to take it because it's a disputed part of Guyana. Guyana borders Venezuela. The southern border of Venezuela is Guyana.
Hmm.
Guyana, in just the past 2 or 3 years, has become one of the richest countries in the world. Now, they have no expertise to get the oil out of the ground whatsoever. So it is American
Hmm.
corporate interests doing it, and they pay themselves a royalty for doing it. So they pay themselves a certain amount of money for adding the expertise, but a large amount of the money does go to the Guyanese people. And Guyana is actually trying to manage what that means, what it means for the windfall that each individual Guyanese person has received in the past 3 or 4 years.
Hmm.
And I assume the Venezuela deal wouldn't be that different, but I don't know the details of the deal. But if it is like the
Hmm.
Guyanese deal, the neighboring country exploited by the exact same companies that are going to have to be in Venezuela, there's only so many oil companies. It's
Right.
Exxon, it's British Petroleum, it's the same old companies. So Shell, whoever else. So all of these companies that are down there, and the deal they gave Guyana, which I think most people say is a great deal. So I don't know the actual percentages, but everyone looks to be happy about it. The commercial exploitation is going full-fledged ahead because the incentives are there. The people are really happy about it in Guyana. America did protect Guyanese interests when they still couldn't predict or control what was going on in Venezuela. But it's the neighboring oil patch, and I suspect it's all the same technology, all the same players. And I would imagine that the Venezuelans are going to get some similar advantage to what they got in Guyana. Now, that doesn't
Hmm.
mean there aren't commercial advantages for Americans. Absolutely. I think Trump has been very clear. He wants oil prices, he wants gas prices at rock bottom levels. This serves American interests abroad very much. It gives America leverage over Russia. It gives America a ton of leverage in the world. So it could even mean peace in Ukraine and Russia for that reason.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's a lot that goes on with controlling oil prices globally that are good for the American consumer and are good for American foreign interests. So
Hmm.
now I would be very interested if someone knows the exact deal that the people of Venezuela are getting. I don't think it's public yet. I just
Yeah.
suspect it's going to look like the Guyanese deal.
Yeah, I got a feeling those terms are probably going to be pretty favorable to the good old US of A, especially right now, as you and I have talked about extensively on the show before, is energy and power is kind of becoming the ultimate thing that all the countries are fighting over right now. So my question for you, Nolan, is, there's always kind of a time lag when it comes to energy markets. So my question for you is, how long do you think it would realistically take for increased Venezuelan production to even meaningfully affect global supply chains or pricing? Like that's still months, if not years ahead, right?
I don't know. It depends on the state of all of the infrastructure there. I know where I am. I'm just off the Venezuelan border as we speak, just off Venezuelan waters. And when the Maduro black bag thing happened, all the airspace here was closed, just like it's closed in El Paso today. What I saw were tons of military aircraft flying overhead for days. My understanding is they were going to secure, and the reason why we weren't allowed flights or boats or anything out of the island is because they were securing all the deep water oil drilling rigs and stuff like that. So I know the capacity of Venezuela had gone way down compared to what it was prior to Chavez nationalizing it all. So it depends on how quickly they can reestablish capacity. A lot of the infrastructure is already there. They were a huge powerhouse. So a lot of this isn't like Guyana. They don't have to go in the ground fresh and build the platforms. A lot of it is to what extent they can re-rig it all and get it all going. So I don't know the exact timeline, but from what I hear from a lot of the oil executives who are mentioning, it's going to be quick, much quicker than people are expecting.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Because I thought I remember reading like they were only producing, I feel like I'm pulling this out of somewhere. Like it's like 20% of their capacity. It's way lower than they're capable of. So I would be curious as to how quickly they can get things up and running again, because the ramifications of that globally would be pretty immense. So we'll see how that plays out. But we're going to take a quick break here, Nolan. When we're back, though, we're going to be joined by our other guest this morning, who will be joining us to talk about some more stories, including what's going on in the Japanese markets as they are surging to new highs after a recent election. That and more when we return here at RoxomTV News. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Our next story is taking place in Japan, where voters delivered a political landslide that sent financial markets into celebration mode. Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi secured a historic supermajority, giving her Liberal Democratic Party 68% of the lower house, which means she can now pass legislation without needing help from rivals who would prefer she did not. Investors reacted almost immediately. The Nikkei 225 surged to record highs, the broader TOPIX followed, and traders appeared relieved that political uncertainty had been replaced by something markets love even more than stability: control. Bond yields climbed as markets priced in higher government spending, and the yen, which had weakened before the vote, strengthened afterward as uncertainty faded. That tells you that investors are optimistic in the short term, but they are also recalculating risk. Japan already carries one of the highest public debt loads in the developed world, so large stimulus plans can boost growth now while quietly raising questions about long-term sustainability. Takashi campaigned on tax cuts, expanded defense spending, and a more assertive posture toward China, especially around Taiwan, and that mix of fiscal stimulus and geopolitical clarity is what investors are betting on. She has also spoken out about what she calls foreigner fatigue, voiced opposition to gay marriage, and emphasized traditional gender roles, positions that have energized supporters and drawn criticism from others. Now, for those of you at home, this matters because Japan is the world's third largest economy. When Tokyo moves, global markets move, supply chains move, and currency values shift. And if fiscal spending surges while the Bank of Japan remains cautious, the tension between politics and monetary policy could ripple far beyond Japan's borders. Joining me to talk about this story and others, of course, we got Nolan Bauerle, and I want to welcome the founder and CEO of Azteco, Akin Fernandez, aka Beauty On. Akin, Nolan, gentlemen, welcome. Great to have you both. Akin, how are you? Yeah, thank you for joining us today, Akin. And so we've got a lot to talk about, and I want to go on this Japan story first, of course. Japan just handed Prime Minister Takashi a supermajority, and markets immediately rallied. Akin, when you see that kind of reaction, is it really about her specific policies, or is it more that investors just love certainty, even if the policy direction carries some risk? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's to do with the policies, especially the country like Japan appears to be, which is a more conservative across the board society. And also her plans for the military spending will also be of great interest to people who are running any kind of industrial things in Japan. I think that's very, very significant. They're going to build a very large aircraft carrier, I read this morning. And so Japan seems to be coming out of the shadows of the Second World War, and they're going to change their constitution so they can have a proper army to defend themselves. I believe that the Prime Minister said that nobody's coming to Japan's rescue if somebody comes after them, which of course is correct. So they have to do this. They have to defend themselves. They're going to spend the money to do it, and they're going to source all of their military equipment and everything else from inside their own country, which is good for their economy. And then there's all the other things that they're doing with the economy, because this is not a socialist government. This is a more free market leaning government, apparently, and that's good for business. And I think the stock markets have reflected that.
Yeah, no, so far it seems like everybody's loving it. Nolan, what's your beat on this? Do you like what you're seeing out of Japan? I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, remember that the Liberal Democratic Party, the one that was reelected, is the most successful political party in the world of any so-called first world country that has existed since World War I. They barely ever change power. They've only lost one time for a very brief period. So sometimes they can be punished by getting something like closer to a majority government. This supermajority really does reiterate that her own policies, which align almost 100% with the United States, are what the country wanted. And if you look at the incentives that are there as far as alignment with energy, I think Japan has said they're going to go 100% sourced with U.S. energy. So this ties into the whole Dunro doctrine and the Venezuela supply that America has tapped. And then, of course, the Japan carry trade is a big existential crisis for America, because America has been using Japan as a sponge for our own inflation, our own monetary policy. And so having that align means that we can fix it in one place. It essentially means we're going to probably dollarize the yen. We're probably going to let the yen inflate because they're going to go crazy. And then they're going to offer them some form of USD stable coin that they can have, and that it will go in that direction. But never forget the reason why Satoshi Nakamoto first took the name Satoshi Nakamoto, I believe, when we come out of the financial crisis in 2008, is to kind of have that moral authority to say to America what we experienced in the lost decade in Japan, what we experienced through financial manipulation, through the windfall of the Plaza Accords in 1983. Remember, Reagan negotiated that the yen doubled overnight, which created the entire 1980s Japan boom. Imagine you woke up in 1983 and suddenly Disney was half price. Suddenly an American trip was half price. Suddenly the first Nike Airs were half price. Everything was half price to them. That's why they bought all of the Empire State Building and Rockefeller Center, and why everyone was worried about Japan taking over back then. They were suddenly twice as rich overnight. So fast forward to now, that all went for nothing. They inflated that away in the 1990s. And Satoshi Nakamoto is Satoshi Nakamoto, I believe, because he wanted to say to America, you're Japan now. Unless you do something like Bitcoin, whatever we just experienced is coming your way. You're not going to be able to do this. And so we're in a situation now where Japan looks poised to be the first country to really understand why Bitcoin is so important at an existential level, because they're about to have a weaponized US dollar enter. And to maintain their own sovereignty, I think you're going to see a real pathway towards Bitcoin over there. So bullish for Bitcoin, bullish for the Dunro doctrine, bullish for America-Japan relations, and Korea should be next.
Yeah, definitely bullish for Bitcoin. I mean, they were talking about more stimulus and defense spending, so get ready to fire up that money printer. But Japan already has one of the highest public debt levels in the developed world right now. So, Akin, my question for you is, how long do you think markets can celebrate this fiscal expansion before they start worrying about sustainability? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a tricky question. Will they ever start worrying about sustainability? Because it appears that they don't seem to care about sustainability. They only care about the short-term gains and short-term changes. So I don't know if that's the case. But going back to what Nolan said, did you see that Marco Rubio has declared that the U.S. dollar has 5 years left to go because of the other countries in the world asserting their sovereignty and control over their currencies. And this is an absolutely astonishing admission that the US dollar actually could disappear in its current form. And that begs the question of what's going to replace it. And I'd be very surprised if he was rolled out and allowed to say this if they didn't have a contingency plan of some kind. What that contingency plan is going to be is anybody's guess. No doubt some people will say it's going to be some kind of stable coin or something like that. And of course, the Bitcoiners would wish that America would go onto a Bitcoin standard, which is very unlikely. But America could go onto a Bitcoin standard because the people are free to adopt it. So this is not something that needs to come from the top down. It's something that can come from the bottom up. And I think it's up to the people who are mediating Bitcoin, who are distributing Bitcoin to the population to make that kind of magic happen. And I've just heard also that Square are offering Bitcoin to all of their Cash App users without fees. So you can get Bitcoin without paying any fees. Now this, in theory, could actually increase the distribution of Bitcoin to Cash App users dramatically. It will remain to be seen. But the key to that story is that it takes entrepreneurs to make this happen. You can't rely on the state to make Bitcoin happen, to get into the hands of people. That's what we do at Azteco. That's what Cash App is doing and other people are doing. And we have to act during this time of flux where Trump is in charge and massive changes are happening in the West. This is our time to strike, to use a unfortunate word that means something else. So we need to do this as quickly and as aggressively as possible to secure our place in the financial future. And I think we'd be fools and we would deeply regret it if we didn't take this opportunity.
And Akin, I appreciate you sharing that info with us. Nolan, what do you think? We only got 5 more years of U.S. trash tokens. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what I see happening from the weaponization of the dollar with the Genius Act, for example, I think you're going to see it in a place like Japan, where you can use the dollar for now to shock absorb an inflation in the end. And now it's a psychological engine. These are psychological commodities. So it is going to be when people decide. If it doesn't look like Japan is using that money to increase the birth rate, to increase the optimism of the country, then you're going to see it come through the money. But if we're right about what Besant is doing, which is to allow yield interest to be paid on a stable coin generated out of the Treasury, not the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, if it goes to these places, and in foreign countries, they can actually offer yield, so 10% interest, you're going to have Americans where the stable coins, if you look at the fight right now between Brian Armstrong and what's going on with the banks to ban interest, any yield in domestically for them, you're going to have low interests when it comes to the actual money in America, but you're going to have high interest on the foreign stable coins distributed abroad. So you can see dollarization happening with those incentives. Now, why would anyone be interested in the bonds that the Treasury is issuing if they can't put any interest on it? It's going to be because they're going to probably back it with something like a bit bond, something like you get your dollar back in 10 years, and 1% of the bond raise goes to Bitcoin, and you get the Bitcoin in 10 years. So you can start to see these instances of what we call bimetallism. It's sort of the beginning of bimetallism, one money for consuming, one money for saving. And you can really imagine how that's going to change other countries. You're going to have political money in the US dollar, but more or less like food stamps, more or less about achieving policy objectives of the government, what's left of it. And then you'll have the Bitcoin component for the actual productive part of the economy, the energy companies, the military contractors, the ones who are building real things, not consumer products, real products that help assert power and you know, lay down narrative supply chain. That's what you can call it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's time to.
Sorry, I have to jump in here. This is very, very interesting. If this is the case in any way, shape, or form, you would think that, first of all, we're not the only ones who know this. And secondly, it would be reflected in the price. And so what Nolan just described is not so far in the future that we won't see the effects basically in the short term. So the price of Bitcoin is artificially low in a way that is literally inexplicable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with the tailwinds and all of the news we've seen in the last year. The price certainly is not reflecting the fundamentals of what we're seeing for Bitcoin right now. And I want to get into that a little bit deeper, guys, as we're going to start with our Bitcoin stories of the hour. So, guys, let's roll the stinger so me and the gentleman can get into it. Let's go. The Bitcoin price is currently at $66,000 at this hour this morning. And in federal courts in New York, Sam Bankman-Fried is asking for something most defendants do not get: a second chance. According to Bloomberg, the former FTX founder has filed a motion seeking a new trial in his fraud case, arguing that newly surfaced sworn testimony from a former FTX executive could materially affect his conviction. The testimony comes from FTX's former head of data science, Chapsky, and Bankman-Fried's legal team says it qualifies as newly discovered evidence that was not fully presented to the jury the first time around. His attorneys argue that this testimony could challenge parts of the government's narrative about how customer funds were used, how internal controls functioned, and what intent existed behind certain transactions. Bankman-Fried was convicted in November of 2023 in the Southern District of New York on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy tied to FTX's collapse. Prosecutors argued he misappropriated billions in customer funds to support Alameda Research, fund venture bets, and make political donations. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Now, here is the legal reality. Motions for a retrial based on newly discovered evidence face a very high bar. The defense must prove the evidence was genuinely unavailable during the trial, is materially significant, and would likely have changed the verdict. Federal courts do not grant those motions often, and from a market standpoint, this filing is unlikely to move Bitcoin or broader crypto prices. But symbolically, it matters. The collapse of FTX in 2022 triggered one of the largest confidence shocks in digital asset history and intensified regulatory scrutiny across the globe. And for those of you at home, this is more than just about one defendant. It's about accountability, legal precedent, and how financial fraud cases reshape trust in emerging industries. If the court agrees to consider the motion, prosecutors will respond in writing before a judge decides whether this saga gets an encore. I'm bringing the guys back. Akin, when someone like Sam Bankman-Fried files for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence, is that mostly a legal long shot, or does it maybe suggest there are still unanswered questions about how the FTX story was presented in court? What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm not a fan of Sam Bankman-Fried or FTX, but when we talk about matters of justice, he's entitled, Mr. Bankman-Fried, to the same justice that everybody else is has a right of access to. He's entitled to that. And so if his lawyers say that there's a chance that he can get a retrial and have his conviction overturned, obviously he's going to go for it. And this does happen. It might be rare, but if you're the ones facing 25 years in jail, it doesn't matter how rare it is, you're going to take the chance. And so I understand perfectly why he's doing it. I don't have to support it. I don't have to support FTX or all the things that they did, the shenanigans and everything else. But that man has rights. And if one of us as Americans has our rights infringed, that means it can happen to anybody. So I'm very, very cautious about piling on this man as unlikable as he might be, because we have to have a fair, even, flat playing field where the rules don't change, whether you're rich or you're poor or anything else. Obviously, that's not the case in reality, but I think that's the thinking that all real Americans will bring to this story. This guy deserves a fair shot if that shot is available to him. If he has evidence that will exonerate him, it should be presented. The courts should be orderly, not disorderly. And I don't think that's too much for civilized people to ask for.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, even if he is a scumbag, he does deserve a fair trial here in the United States. And if there's new evidence, then there's new evidence. Nolan, what are your thoughts on this? Does Sam Bankman-Fried got a leg to stand on here? What do you make of these
Yeah,
shenanigans?
look, I agree with the frame that everyone for sure deserves their trial. I said the same about P. Diddy when everyone was sure he was guilty. I don't think he's innocent, but he was given a trial and he's allowed to defend himself. What I will say about this one, though, because it's the location that sets off the red flag. The Southern District of New York is believed by many to be the most corrupted court in America. And, they sat on the Epstein stuff forever. P. Diddy was in the Southern, that's why he was cellmates with, or in the next cell with the SBF, because that was the court where a lot of the stuff was being heard. I don't know the details. I just know, I was trained as a lawyer, and I know, having worked with a lot of lawyers in New York City for years, if you say Southern District of New York, left, right, whatever, no one thinks it's credible. They all say, oh, this is a bunch of entrepreneurial judges, entrepreneurial lawyers. You don't want to live in a world with entrepreneurial judges. We got enough room for entrepreneurs in the real economy. We don't need judges being entrepreneurs. And that's kind of what you get over there. And so I don't know the exact status of the current understanding of corruption at the Southern District of New York. I know Trump tried to get people out of there. It didn't work. I know James Comey's daughter was running it for a while. It's a complete and total scam. So, with SBF, if it would go in the way of populism, if there was ever a situation where Trump was being asked to give a pardon, Trump would basically lose all of his support overnight, right? Trump is a populist. It's a bottom-up political party. I think you'd have people like myself that said, if you get into politics here with SBF, you're going to lose your supporters across the board. I've heard many people from the Bitcoin MAGA set say something very similar. So if he has a route with the court, he should definitely go for it. But I think most people have to be aware that not all courts in America are equal, and that the Southern District of New York, not that I have my finger on the pulse of it exactly, what I understand is it's crooked as a question mark, and a lot of people doubt its credibility straight through.
All right. Well, judicial credibility aside here, gentlemen, Akin, even if this motion were to go nowhere, my question to you is, does the continued legal back and forth keep reopening maybe some psychological wounds for the crypto industry? I know I hear SBF or FTX and I get PTSD from those. So do you think the market has kind of moved on from this FTX saga that we saw a couple years ago, or does rehashing this kind of cause people to wince a little bit? It's just the very fact of hearing FTX and SBF again. Is this bad for the industry, even having this kind of in the news right now?
Well, if the industry is disturbed by news of a single company that was doing a very narrow service, then it's extremely immature, and those people need to seek help. Because Bitcoin is not a company. Bitcoin is not represented by a company. It's something. It's like saying that a pet store that sells puppies online, going under, has something to do with the internet, or something to do with web browsers, or something to do with e-commerce. FTX is a self-contained entity, and it brought down the people who chose to go and use it. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Bitcoin. And so people need to understand what Bitcoin actually is. Bitcoin isn't a company. It isn't a group of companies. It's something very different and separate to these things. Now, SBF getting a pardon and all this sort of business, I think he manufactured a bunch of money to give to the Democrats. So I'd be very surprised if the greatest ever president of the United States, Donald Trump, is going to give that gentleman a pardon. That being said, I wonder, not knowing all the details and the ins and outs of the case, I wonder what it is that this gentleman did. Did he actually defraud people? Or did he just break some administrative laws? You know that New York is a very anti-Bitcoin jurisdiction. So whenever anything happens in New York to do with Bitcoin, and somebody who's a Bitcoin entrepreneur or quote-unquote crypto entrepreneur gets hurt, I have a great deal of suspicion when it comes to this, because it's an anti-Bitcoin Luddite jurisdiction, and they do go after people just because they're doing things in Bitcoin. That being said, I think it's important that he gets given a chance if there is evidence, exculpating evidence to exonerate him, and I don't think that's unreasonable or unfair. But going back to this business of FTX somehow contaminating the industry, I don't think normal people have any idea about FTX or Sam Bankman-Fried or anything to do with that. If they're using Bitcoin on their own, I can tell you 100% that the people that Azteco sells Bitcoin to don't know Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm sure the people who run Cash App on their phones and use Bitcoin don't know anything about Sam Bankman-Fried. This is an insider, navel-gazing, and also very interesting, because I don't want to be mean, because it is actually very interesting, because it does affect how Bitcoin is going to work, because companies are mediating it. But it's an insider subject, and the insiders, being normally of a higher order of intelligence, should be able to ignore this signal and disregard it, because the fundamentals of Bitcoin are infinitely more powerful than one company that happens to no longer exist.
And I would say the insider thing is important, because inside of the industry and how he was taken down leads to a lot of interesting threads. When Bill Barr arrested Arthur Hayes in the lead up to the 2020 election, of course, it was, what they got Arthur Hayes for was ridiculous. It was the not stopping selling from US customers, and it was the BitMEX casino, the 100x leverage. Well, SBF comes from creating the 101x leverage, right? He created the exact same product, domiciled in the exact same jurisdiction. He was in Hong Kong at the time. He did the Price is Right trick. He just went up by $1 and, priced Arthur Hayes out. And so he goes from there to creating all of these, mimicking the banksters world. It was all custody on their platform. It was all commingled deposits. You're not supposed to commingle deposits in the licenses they had. You can't commingle deposits if you run a real Bitcoin exchange, because that's not what happens. So what we saw was Sam Bankman-Fried being the biggest political donor in the 2020 election, also running the largest prediction market in the 2020 election. Before there was Polymarket, it was FTX. The cognitive closure of the 2020 election happened when they brought in the not talking heads. They brought in the non-sympathetic or non-sentimental gamblers to say, oh, look, Joe Biden won. There was about $1 million of traffic on the entire order book for his prediction market. It happened to be the biggest data point going into the 2020 elections to say Joe Biden won. His political donation to Joe Biden was larger, 3 times larger than the entire trade volume for the only prediction market, which really went to scale in 2020. And from there, of course, SBF starts lobbying for custodian rules. That's what creates a reaction from folks like Eric Voorhees in crypto. SBF was taken down from inside baseball, inside the industry activity. It was Arthur Hayes getting out of his lockup that they had him under because of this Bill Barr fake arrest they undertook in 2020. The minute he could take off the muzzle, which was part of the punishment, he went directly after SBF. He started attacking him for what he did. You had Eric Voorhees jump in. You had CZ jump in. Everyone knew what SBF was up to in DC. You had 5 commissioners of the CFTC, all appointed by the Democrats at the time, changing rules around prediction markets, changing rules around what was good and what wasn't. It was all to serve SBF. That's why when SBF went down, a lot of people in Bitcoin and crypto were very happy. When we saw it as affecting the actual banksters industry, it was the bank man fried. We were frying the bank man because he was exposing all of the things he was up to. It was all pay to play, get the regulators on your side, get Arthur Hayes in jail, all these really disgusting things. There's no way you would have someone else in the Bitcoin industry saying Arthur Hayes deserves to go to jail. Yeah. He was a hero. There's no one wanting him to go to jail.
Absolutely 100% a hero. And I have the tweets to prove it. His company was an extraordinary company where you could join it, send Bitcoin to it, and play in that arena that they made. It was one of the, technically, it's a great achievement, super responsive, super fast. And so you've asserted that Sam Bankman-Fried has something to do with BitMEX and Arthur Hayes going down. The thing is this: why is there somebody who Sam Bankman-Fried can run to go and harm other people? That's actually the real big questions. Taking a step back, and Bill Barr should never have gone after Arthur Hayes at all, because what this person is doing, first of all, is outside of the United States, and secondly, it's actually not illegal in any way, because if you take the correct position that Bitcoin actually isn't money, and what they're doing there is just playing on the database, then you can look at it in a proper way. I don't know if you knew that they reconciled their Bitcoin payouts once a day. So literally all the activity that was happening on BitMEX was all synthetic. And so it's very important to look at the actual facts of how these things work, and the law as it is in the United States and in Hong Kong, where that wonderful website is being run from. And that's what has to be taken into account. It's completely wrong that the law can be weaponized in crony capitalism to destroy people's enemies, people's commercial entities. And so, commercial enemies. And so, obviously, there's no Sam Bankman-Fried is not in jail because he played these shenanigans. But if there was a pretext for putting him into jail, that would certainly be one of them. Weaponizing the courts, weaponizing the legal system to take out your competitors. It's unconscionable. It's anti-American, and I think. Well, I can imagine a future where things like that cannot happen, because the law and the people who enforce it are better disciplined by Bitcoin being the money of the United States. But that's that's a fantasy for the future. How far in the future? Who knows?
Yeah, speaking of the future, guys, I want to move on to our next story here where we have some Bitcoin price predictions. So stay tuned. I'm going to bring you both back in a second, because billionaire investor Bill Miller believes Bitcoin has likely found its cycle low around $60,000. And he says the setup from here looks constructive. Let's take a look at what he had to say on CNBC.
That's how I teased it. You have a number in mind. What is it? I actually think there's a reasonable chance we saw the bottom last week at 60,000. There's a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, $60,000 is the cash production cost for a new Bitcoin. Okay. So what happens is when you get below that, the weak miners start going out of business, they shut down, and they're the main source of marginal selling pressure. So when the weak hands are out, okay, you have a less selling pressure and it's likely to put in a bottom. The second reason is Bitcoin trades on global liquidity. And if you look at when it peaked in the fall, it just so happened to be the exact same time that the Fed noticed huge stresses in short-term funding markets that effectively created an entire 180 on monetary policy. So if you look at what the Fed was doing in the fall, they were allowing $50 billion a month to go off of their balance sheet, just drain away. Now, what happened in December? They did a complete 180 on that. And what they're doing is buying $40 billion net a month. So you've seen a net swing in liquidity from the world's largest liquidity provider to the tune of $90 billion a month. Mm-hmm. So you have this huge floor of liquidity, right, that just came in. You've got the cash production costs there. And there's another technical element here, which is if you look at historical bottoms in Bitcoin, they've often happened when the percent of the supply in loss exceeds the percent of the supply in profit. And 60,000 is right around where that happens. So you have a whole bunch of factors converging at around 60.
Well, Miller's call here is clear. He believes the bottom is likely in. Markets will now decide whether he is early, right, or both. I'm bringing the guys back. Akin, Bill Miller is arguing that $60,000 makes sense as a bottom because it lines up with miner production costs and historical on-chain stress levels. When you hear that, does that feel like solid structural reasoning to you or post hoc storytelling? What are the vibes you're getting from this Bill's call here?
Well, I don't know about post hoc rationalization or storytelling. It might be more like reading tea leaves in a couple. But it's interesting. The assertion is that the cost to produce a Bitcoin is $60,000. I wonder, and I'm not a an expert in these things. I don't know how these people have their mining rigs set up, but I wonder: is it possible that these miners can turn off the mining boxes, which are called boxing, if you're a software person? Can they turn them off in a fine-grained way so that they can dial down the amount of electricity that they're using to produce the Bitcoin when the price goes down, and dial it up if they need more hash rate? I wonder if that's true. That would mean that the miners can control how much they're spending to produce the Bitcoin. So to put it into terms like it costs 60,000 to make a Bitcoin, I don't know if that's actually accurate. You have to ask somebody who does mining. But I have to say that I find it very, very amusing that these people come on to CNBC and talk about Bitcoin as if they know everything about it. Whereas a couple of years ago, they were saying it's a Ponzi, it's not real, it's going to crash, it's going to go to zero. All of a sudden, everybody's on the Bitcoin bandwagon, and now they're being relied upon as sources of absolute truth to say what the Bitcoin price is going to be like, how mining works, and everything else. It's very, very, very interesting, but it's actually also encouraging, because what it means is that it's possible to change people's minds in one direction or another if you have the right inroads into their psychology. And so what people who are interested in spreading Bitcoin to the world, what they need to do is get an Edward Bernays style campaign to change the minds of these talking heads so that in CNBC, ABC, NBC, everything else, everybody is talking like a Bitcoiner. And it is possible to do, because the shift in the Overton window shift between the way things were before and the way they are now is nothing less than dramatic. So I think that's what we need to be working on, and concentrating less on what these people are saying, but the overall impression that they're putting across that Bitcoin is legitimate. There's no question that Bitcoin is legitimate. It's a question of how much it's worth. And of course, what the next step that needs to be inserted into these people's thinking is that the price of Bitcoin doesn't matter at all. What matters is the business model that delivers it to the people and how people use it on their phones to buy and sell things. If the Bitcoin passes through the consumer to the merchant in a quick enough manner, then the price of Bitcoin doesn't matter, because what it's carrying is dollars, or carrying the fiat of the nation state. And so it needs to move very quickly. It's only when it's static that you get impacted by the price going up and down. And so those changes that are coming to the market are being developed right now, but they have to be, Bitcoin has to be spoken about correctly, has to be understood correctly before anything to do with it makes any sense.
I really like, I like that you put the Edward Bernays on it, because I think about Bernays all the time. Bernays really architected the American mind coming out of World War II. He's the one who literally induced consumer behavior in the American mind. The whole point was to remain on a strong war footing, that we could turn the industrial war machine back on with the flip of a switch. And that meant every person had to have a washing machine and a vacuum cleaner, because those all were tanks right after. So this is a conscious decision made by both Eisenhower to limit the power of the military industrial complex and replace it with a consumer mindset so that Americans could pivot very quickly if needed. Now, the problem with the model is we ended up getting the worst of both worlds. We offshore. The point was to keep manufacturing onshore by inducing American consumer behavior. We got rid of the manufacturing. We brought in the Cantillon effect. We brought in all of these Triffin dilemma issues of running these huge deficits, and we turned the best job in America into being a financial engineer. The smartest people, the highest IQs, will go into the job that pays the most. We did 80 years now of financial engineers, and we're reaping what we sowed. That's why we have all these sludge people around in America. That's why we have all this trouble. We made our best and brightest into Sam Bankman-Frieds, and that was a mistake that we got to pay for. And the way we pay for that is indeed changing how we have this relationship with money. It might even be, you got to go further down into the financial engineering to get out of it. And that's what a lot of Bitcoiners are doing out on the risk curve, out on all this new ways of seeing markets, taking risks, taking chances, and bringing a little bit of that financial engineering muscle to the game to architect new products and new services that hopefully have a big payoff for the entrepreneurs doing it, but also change our mindset and also induce a completely new attitude when it comes to consumption, when it comes to time preference. Really reprogramming our subconscious in the end is what it's all about.
Well, actually, yeah, you're right. It's to do with programming the consumer behavior. Also, if your whole money is based on saving and not on spending, that will induce frugality into everything that you buy. When you buy a pair of jeans, you're going to buy some cheap pair that's going to fall apart. You're going to buy one that's going to last you 5 years, 6 years, even 10 years, something that's well made. And that's very, very useful. But going back to what you said about creating a whole generation of Sam Bankman-Frieds, I think the software industry in the United States, which is better than basically anywhere in the world, I think many people went into that and other things. And those are some of the most intelligent people, the most capable people. And so it hasn't been a complete disaster. Although, once again, people trying to manage the economy from the top down is the fundamental error. It's the fundamental type error that, if it hadn't been done, would have put America in a better place rather than the place it has been. We can see the end of this, and Bitcoin will work towards that by constraining the people who think that they are God and that they can plan the economy. So it's very important that Bitcoin gets into everybody's hands, that it becomes, at a minimum, the money of the internet, with all of the things it's going to bring, like the elimination of payer fraud, for example, which is worth billions, little things like that. That's going to be the big game changer. And then, of course, from there, you're going to have the top-down pressure of the big companies who are starting to use Bitcoin, and the ground-up pressure from the peasants using Bitcoin. And that's how the transformation is going to happen. And it has to happen. And Mr. Rubio saying that the dollar has only 5 years left to go is kind of a tacit admission of that. If the dollar really only has 5 years left, what are they going to do about it? What are they going to replace it with? They must be thinking about this, and I'm very keen to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And I got to tell you, I think both me and my audience can say the same thing about all the insights and expertise you have both brought to the program this morning. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. Nolan, it's always a pleasure. And everybody, you can check out Nolan at The Great Awakening before our show every single day here at RoxomTV News. So Nolan, I can't wait to see you tomorrow and jam more for our Thursday session. And Akin, such a pleasure to have you on. It was great getting the opportunity to chat with you this morning. I'm sure you gained a couple new fans in our audience today. And for those new fans out there that are saying, we want more Akin, where's the best place I can send them where they can get more info on you and what you and your company are up to?
They can go to azte.co, which is the company that I'm running, or they can find me on X as Beautyon, but they might not want to there.
Yeah. We love Beautyon. Beautyon, it was a real pleasure for me too, I gotta say. I've been a fan of the content on X for a long time, and I like straight talking Bitcoiners, so there you go.
It's a pleasure. Anytime you want to talk to me, I'm available.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Nolan, I'll see you tomorrow. Akin, I hope to see you very soon, my friend. Thanks again for stopping by.
It's a pleasure. See you later.
Cheers. Cheers, guys. All right, gang, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be diving into the second hour of today's programming. We got more top stories on the docket, so stay tuned. RoxomTV News will be right back after this. Leading us off this hour, newly surfaced FBI records are putting President Donald Trump back into the Epstein timeline conversation. According to the document, Palm Beach police told federal investigators that Trump called them in 2006 during the early stages of the Epstein investigation and said, quote, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." Now, that remark places Trump in the early awareness of Epstein's alleged conduct at the same moment local authorities were examining abuse allegations. Now, to be clear, the document does not accuse Trump of any criminal wrongdoing. His allies argue the memo shows nothing more than a passing comment and does not demonstrate involvement or complicity. Critics, however, say the remark reinforces long-standing concerns that powerful figures were aware of Epstein's behavior long before meaningful legal consequences followed. The issue is resurfacing amid a broader release of Epstein-related files that have triggered political fallout beyond the United States. In the UK, the controversy has destabilized parts of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government as links between Epstein and senior figures prompted resignations. Financial institutions are also facing renewed scrutiny, including UBS, which reportedly maintained accounts for Ghislaine Maxwell despite internal risk concerns. Maxwell recently appeared before the House Oversight Committee and repeatedly invoked her Fifth Amendment right, declining to answer substantive questions. Her attorney suggested she would consider fuller testimony only if granted presidential clemency, a proposal that drew bipartisan criticism. Meanwhile, Democratic lawmakers introduced Virginia's law, named after Virginia Giuffre, aimed at strengthening victims' rights and limiting secret plea deals. And for viewers at home, this story is less about one quote and more about institutional accountability. The central question remains simple and stubborn. Who knew what, and when did they know it? And as more documents are reviewed, that question is not going away. So I want to give you my beat on this story because here's what makes this one particularly complicated. The FBI memo does not accuse Donald Trump of a crime, and it does not establish involvement. But it does raise a very uncomfortable question about awareness, and awareness is often where these conversations start to get a little sticky. If the quote is accurately recorded, and Trump did tell a police chief in 2006 that everyone has known he's been doing this, then the real issue is not about one phone call. It's about how widespread knowledge of Epstein's behavior may have been inside elite circles long before legal consequences followed. Trump's allies argue that the comment, if made, shows nothing more than him expressing relief that law enforcement was intervening, and that's a fair reading from one angle. Critics argue that it reinforces a broader pattern in the Epstein saga, where powerful individuals appeared to know things privately that the public only learned years later, and that's also a fair question to raise. And what makes this different from typical partisan noise is that the Epstein story has destabilized figures across party lines and across countries, which tells you this isn't cleanly left or right. It's about institutions, influence, and whether social proximity to power shields people from scrutiny. And when you add in Ghislaine Maxwell invoking the Fifth again and new legislative efforts like Virginia's law, you start to see why this story keeps resurfacing. At its core, this is not about relitigating headlines from 20 years ago. It's about whether the public believes that accountability applies evenly, regardless of wealth, status, or political alignment. And that question does not fade quietly. Moving on to our next story, across the pond in Switzerland, where voters are preparing to decide whether the country should place a constitutional cap on its population at 10 million people. Now, the referendum scheduled for June 14th stems from a proposal backed by the Swiss People's Party after it gathered the required signatures under Switzerland's direct democracy system. The initiative would require the government to take action if the permanent population approaches 10 million people before 2050. That action could include restrictions on immigration, asylum, or family reunification. Switzerland currently has just over 9 million residents, and roughly 27% are foreign nationals, many from the European Union under free movement agreements. Supporters argue that continued growth is straining housing, transportation, and public services. They frame the proposal as a sustainability measure aimed at preserving quality of life. Opponents, including the Swiss Federal Council and both chambers of parliament, warn that a hard population cap could disrupt labor markets and strain relations with the European Union. business groups say Swiss industries depend heavily on foreign workers in healthcare, construction, hospitality, and technology. And economists note that demographic growth also reflects longevity and natural population increases, meaning that migration limits alone may not address broader trends. Polls suggest the country is nearly evenly split on the issue. And for viewers at home, this vote reflects a larger debate many developed nations are currently navigating. How do you balance economic competitiveness with infrastructure capacity? How do you maintain open labor markets while addressing public concerns over growth? Switzerland's decision could influence similar debates across Europe. And because Switzerland sits at the crossroads of European finance and labor mobility, the ripple effects may extend well beyond its borders. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by a surprise guest for the second part of today's show, so stay tuned. We'll be back with more top stories right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Our next story is taking place in Amsterdam, where the world's second largest brewer is admitting something quietly uncomfortable. Beer demand is not what it used to be. Heineken announced plans to cut up to 6,000 jobs over the next 2 years, roughly 7% of its global workforce, as it adjusts to slower growth and prepares for CEO transition later this spring. The company says softer consumer spending and shifting drinking habits are weighing on volumes, especially in Europe and other mature markets. And this is not only a Heineken issue. Rivals like Carlsberg and Anheuser-Busch have also trimmed costs as the industry struggles to rekindle consistent consumption growth. Gallup reports that only 54% of U.S. adults now say they drink alcohol, a record low, and for the first time, a majority say even moderate drinking is bad for health. Among young adults aged 18 to 34, drinking rates have declined steadily over the past 2 decades, and Pew Research shows that Americans are socializing less in person and spending more time at home, which translates into fewer nights built around bars, concerts, and house parties. Or in other words, it's not only what people drink, it's how they live. And meanwhile, the fastest growing pocket of the alcohol market is no and low alcohol beverages, which IWSR projects will continue expanding through 2028. Consumers are not necessarily abandoning the ritual of having a drink, they are renegotiating it. For viewers at home, this matters because it signals broader shifts in lifestyle and consumer behaviors. When fewer young people age into habitual drinking, companies built on steady per capita consumption are forced to rethink pricing, staffing, and growth assumptions. Heineken's cuts are less about one bad quarter and more about an industry confronting a cultural reset. Now, joining me to chat about this story and others, I have independent journalist Frank Corva. Frank, thanks for joining us today. Always great to have you on the show. How are you?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on again. Things are good. How are you doing?
Oh, they're going great, but I'm disappointed to hear that the youth today aren't drinking beers like they used to. What's going on with that, Frank? Is this just a health movement, or is the new generation just that much less cool than ours were? Where do you stand on this?
I hear that. I do have to say, I feel like one of the uncool kids. Actually, I think this New Year's was my 8-year sober anniversary.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, didn't have a drinking problem. Actually, decided to stop drinking. It was New Year's Eve, December 2017. I decided to stop drinking. I said, I'm going to take a year off just to save some money, because it's like in New York, if you go out and even if you spend, let's just say you have 3 beers on a Friday, 3 beers on a Saturday, you're still talking about, with a tip, spending over $30 each night, which at the end of the month comes out to $240. We're talking about 6 beers here. This isn't a lot. And I'm in New York, so obviously there's some context there. But in this time, of great uncertainty, I think you get people saying, okay, looking a little bit closer at their bottom line, saying, what am I spending my money on? Do I need to be out spending money on beer? Now, like, I had a great time drinking beers for most of my youth. I really enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I just haven't done it. It's a good, it's a fun pastime. But I think the bigger issue is that, I don't think about it. I don't think it's too much of like a health craze thing as much as it is an economic thing. It's that
Yeah.
it's expensive. It's not a necessity. And right now, with uncertainty from AI replacing jobs to just people coming out of college and the job market not being what it was for, most other college graduates in recent history, I just think people are doing what they can to maybe save where they can, and cutting out a few drinks a week seems like a pretty logical place to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, paying $10 for a pint of empty calories isn't exactly the best business decision, probably for your pocketbook or your health. And I also wonder though, too, Frank, like we're in this new tech era, and drinking was something where there's a phrase for it. It's called like the third place, right? Like people have their home, they go to work, and like in Europe, it's a very popular thing. It's called like the third place, and you would go to like your
Yeah.
local bar, and you'd socialize and gather with people in your neighborhood. People don't really do that now the same way because everyone's connected at home, and it's a lot easier just to be at home and have your headset on or whatever, talking to people. So a part of me wonders, like, is this shift in alcohol not just an economic thing, not just a health thing, but also it speaks to how society interacts with one another now, which is fundamentally different than it was just 20, 30 years ago. So
Yeah.
maybe that's part of the deal too. Like, how often do you find yourself just going out with people, to a bar these days compared to maybe, 15 years ago? I feel like it's probably not as much, right? Even
Yeah,
if you're
I
not
think
drinking.
100%. Someone asked me this question last night, to be honest. It was funny, but the thing I think that really shifted for me at least, and I think it depends, I guess, maybe how young you are and what your experience was, but I think COVID was the big thing that created
Yeah.
this shift. And I think we've seen that decline in drinking, maybe for this reason, less people being in this third place together. I don't know, but I just remember we got a lot more comfortable being home, speaking to each other through screens as we're doing now, not necessarily having that in-person um, you know, moment or space to do so at a bar. And it's I think things, I don't know if they have fundamentally shifted. It seems like in a way that's the case. That
Mhm.
said, I'm still out at places like that. Maybe it's more of a restaurant than a bar these days. But I think again, even that, it's just, especially if you're living in a major metropolitan area, third spaces are not cheap to be in. If things
Yeah.
are tight economically, as they are for many, we've seen liquidity drying up. We're seeing credit card debt rise. If this is the case, maybe it's just easier to sit home, jump on a call with somebody, have a tea while you're talking with them versus going out. I mean, for me, like I was out at a place last night, had an appetizer. The person I was with had a drink, and I had a seltzer. That's 40, $45 in New York. Just basically,
Yeah.
you're kind of paying just to be there. It's not, it's not. I don't make a ton of money as an independent journalist, so it's like it's something you have to think twice about, and I think that that's really
Yeah.
the bigger decision being made there. And I think generally speaking, when it comes to alcohol, it tends to be something people like to do in the company of others. It's a social
Right.
lubricant, right? So it's
Yeah.
this idea of if we're not doing as much time in these third spaces, in these places where we normally would drink, then obviously I think a decline in sales is just sort of inevitably going to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a great point during COVID, because that definitely seemed to be where that a big part of this change kind of really you started seeing it in real time. And also I think with the younger generation, it seems like they don't drink alcohol maybe for part of the same reasons that we did, because we needed it, because we had to ask girls out in real life and not
Totally.
over apps. And I
Yeah.
needed some of that social lubricant to go across the bar and approach a girl. And these kids aren't even going out to hang out with their friends anymore. And I've heard it too. Like, I have two much younger siblings. All of them and their friends, nobody knows how to talk to anybody in real life. It is bizarre. And
It's
it just
yeah.
speaks to the era we live in, I guess. So
Yeah.
you don't need it. I still need it. I'm going to keep drinking. I'll have one for you, Frank, too. No problem. I got you in the next one.
I appreciate
All right,
appreciate the forthrightness there too. Appreciate that
Yeah,
honesty. Yeah.
Of course, of course. All right. We're going to move on to the next story, Frank. So hang 10. I'll be back with you in just a second. Because on Wall Street, the fear has shifted from AI will boost productivity to AI might replace the product. You see, investors recently dumped software, data analytics, and information services stocks after new AI agent tools from Anthropic triggered fresh anxiety about automation. The S&P 5 Software and Services Index dropped roughly 13% in the sell-off, while the iShares Software ETF IGV is down close to 20% year-to-date, erasing nearly $1 trillion in market value across the sector. Now, that is not a rounding error. What changed here is the narrative narrative. Many software companies charge per seat, per user, per workflow. If AI reduces the number of humans needed for those workflows, revenue assumptions get stress tested pretty quickly. Bloomberg dubbed it as the SaaSpocalypse, reflecting the idea that AI does not need to beat every product. It only needs to make customers renegotiate renewals. Financial data firms like S&P Global also saw pressure after issuing cautious profit guidance, with analysts explicitly linking investor sensitivity to AI disruption. The concern here is that proprietary data and reoccurring subscriptions may not be as defensible if AI systems can synthesize research and automate tasks more cheaply. And not everyone agrees the panic is rational, however. Some executives, including ARM's CEO, have called the sell-off overblown, arguing that regulated workflows, entrenched customer relationships, and proprietary data sets will still carry weight. Interestingly, though, retail investors have poured record inflows into software stocks during the decline, effectively betting this is a buy the dip moment rather than an extinction event. And for viewers at home, this is not only trader drama. If investors conclude that AI will compress white-collar workflows, that influences hiring plans, wages, and job security in sectors like legal support, marketing, insurance, and analytics. And it also affects retirement accounts and index funds that are heavily weighted toward tech. Markets are essentially asking one big question here. Is AI an efficiency upgrade, or is it a revenue disruptor? The answer will determine whether this is a temporary shakeout or a deeper revaluation of the modern software economy. And I want to give you my take really quick here, because what's fascinating is how quickly this narrative flipped. You see, for the last couple of years, the dominant story was that AI would boost productivity, it would enhance margins, and act as a tailwind for software companies. And now, almost overnight, investors are asking whether AI might actually shrink the very workflows those companies charge for. That is not a small shift in tone. A lot of SaaS businesses monetize human activity, seats, users, hours worked, reports generated, and if AI agents can perform some of those tasks with fewer people involved, the revenue assumptions that justified premium valuations start looking pretty fragile. And markets hate fragile assumptions. But here's where I think people need to slow down a little bit. There's a big difference between AI assisting workflows and AI replacing entire enterprise systems that are embedded in regulated industries, compliance structures, and long-term contracts. Yeah, some of those tools will get disrupted, some pricing power will get challenged, but entrenched data, distribution relationships, and switching costs still matter, and they don't disappear overnight because a demo looks impressive on stage. What we're really watching is capital repricing expectations. In a low-rate world, recurring revenue was treated almost like a bond substitute, something steady and predictable, and now investors are asking, is it actually predictable? And that question doesn't only affect stock charts, it affects hiring plans, wage growth, and how secure white-collar roles feel over the next decade. This isn't panic for panic's sake. It's the market trying to figure out whether AI is a productivity layer on top of a software or a competitor underneath it. And that distinction will matter a lot. We're bringing Frank back. Frank, what's your make of this with AI jobs? We were told that it was going to boost productivity and it was going to be endless bounty for all. And now they're like, wait a second, this might actually eliminate a bunch of the customers that we thought we'd be servicing. What are your thoughts on AI right now? I know it's a bit of a Wild West. Where are you at with where we are right now in that space?
Yeah, we'll jump into that, but I wanted to say your take, that was not only a hot take, but very well articulated. Just wanted to say I appreciated that. Yeah, well done. I don't know. I feel like my head is actually spinning. You know, one day it's like, one day it's Claude, and then like the Claude bots are making a social network, and then AI is replacing white collar work. And then this, like, it's like calling it a news cycle is almost like it's like, we don't even like, it just moves so quickly and it's so chaotic that it's almost like, you sort of like, you have to sort of like let things settle a little bit before we actually see what's happening here. But to the AI point, I think one of the things that we're definitely going to see happen soon, and I think the effect that it will inevitably have, is deflation. AI is going to be deflationary. In what ways yet, or in what sort of steps? I don't think anybody fully knows that, because I think some of the things you talked about, there are social relationships embedded in that. I was talking with somebody who does work for Meta, this weekend over does work on the supply chain for Meta, and Meta is still going to need someone like her. And I would say that the work she does is I mean, I don't know if it's white collar work, but she's working amongst
Mhm.
white collar people and doing this work. So I think that white collar work in general, that definition is going to, we need a clearer definition before we can comment on whether or not those jobs are going to disappear or not. The other side to this is that I think with human psychology, at least for the time being, humans like to talk with other people. They like to trust other people. So I think with some of this stuff, maybe some of the technical functions can be replaced, but you're still going to maybe need a human being doing the actual communications on certain levels. I don't think, from what I understand of AI, we're just not at a place where it's going to replace that just yet. But the broader
Yeah.
story here, this is Roxom. We like Bitcoin at Roxom. You guys like
Mhm.
Bitcoin at Roxom. Um, to live in it, we're going to be living in a deflationary world. There's no question, and there's a mismatch when we have deflationary technology or technology in and of itself being deflationary with the inflationary money system that we have. And I think that once we start seeing AI agents start using Bitcoin, and we're seeing more use cases for Bitcoin to be used as money, not just amongst human beings, but amongst robots, AI agents, all this kind of stuff. I think things are
Mhm.
going to change pretty quickly. I'm
Yeah.
optimistic that AI will give us some of our time back, but I think it only does that if we're holding some Bitcoin or if we're saving in Bitcoin or using
Yeah.
Bitcoin. So I think that that's my big takeaway there is like, I don't really know what things are going to look like as we move forward, whose job gets replaced and when, or if those jobs get replaced. But I think that as we move into this world, we need a deflationary money to complement this technology, which is deflationary. And I'll shout out to Jeff Booth, one of my favorite people who talks about this topic. So
Mhm.
that's all I keep thinking to myself is like, well, I hope I don't get shaken out of my Bitcoin stack as all this happens, because I feel like I'm going to really need some of that stuff as we move into this like uber deflationary environment.
Yeah, no, you make some really good points. And one thing that keeps getting brought up in this new AI future we're being told about, is I've heard Elon say it numerous times, is he always says the phrase universal basic income, right?
Mm.
It's going to take all the jobs, but then everybody's going to get free money in the form of universal basic income. Is that a realistic future to you? Because I just don't remember a time a billionaire optimized something and then said, you know what? All this money I'm saving, I'm going to give it to everybody else. Like, I just don't see that freaking happening. And that's the thing that they
Yeah.
keep saying, no one's going to need to work anymore. It's going to be world of abundance. But when has that ever happened ever? So do you believe that when you hear from Elon, universal basic income, or is that just noise you think from the world's richest man?
Yeah, I don't even know what he's talking about because I mean, him more than anybody. We have to you have to understand how inflationary that would be. I mean, you only need to look as far back as what we were just talking about, COVID, to
Yeah.
see look how much when we were paying everybody to stay home. And I'm not saying I don't have empathy or sympathy for the people who will lose jobs or the fact that jobs in general will be lost. But I mean, again, with the world that we're moving into, there's an incongruence between a highly inflationary system and deflationary technology. So my thoughts are, I know it sounds still kind of crazy to people. I just think that inevitably Bitcoin must become more ubiquitous because we can't have this mismatch. And with Elon, I don't know, this is Captain Capitalism, right? I don't know who's this
Yeah.
guy talking about like we're just going to be printing money and handing it to people. I don't see why somebody in his position who's a fan of free markets and all that kind of stuff would be talking like that. Again, I really want to stress this point. I know people are nervous about their jobs maybe being lost and this and that, and maybe UBI has to be a thing just to sort of mitigate some of the fallout. The problem is I
Mhm.
just don't think it can be a permanent solution because it's inflationary, and inflation is one of the most pressing problems of our times.
Yeah, yeah. I am so curious and terrified to how this is like how things are going to be in just 10 years from now. Given I feel like the promises of AI are always like it's right around the corner, and then you kind of kick the can down the line a little bit. So I think it's going to happen a little more slowly than we think, but still,
Yeah.
like 10 years from now, things are going to look very different. And hopefully, not you and I will just be getting free money in the form of Bitcoin from the government or something. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
It's
I
all
don't think
craziness to
that
me.
I don't think Bitcoin is going to be part of the UBI plan. I think you're going to get the
No.
government CBDC or whatever that is.
Yeah.
I think what people have to think about, I think about this a lot lately, to be honest, is just, how am I providing value and how might that change in a world where a robot could potentially provide that same value?
Right.
And I think one of the big things that's going to be underrated and that people should be paying attention to is soft skills, or what we call like like the ability to communicate with people, whether it's a
Yeah.
teacher, whether it's even someone working in the service industry, providing an experience for someone, a creator who's putting things together that right now AI can't put together, whatever that is. But the thing with that, the thing that I fear and makes me kind of sad is that a lot of people are sort of living right now with a bit of a scarcity mindset because things are very uncertain. You know,
Yeah.
we're watching liquidity dry up, in the hands of homeowners and retail investors and things. So ideally, it's like I just sort of hope that people find a little bit of headspace to reflect on the shifts that are happening, think about ways they could continue to be more valuable to whatever their job or to their clients, whatever they're doing. Because I think that's the way we're probably going to have to think. I think in the grand scheme of things, I think it's actually a good slash cool thing that the 40-hour work week is going to go away. But I don't think that's going to be a smooth transition by any stretch of the imagination. And I mean, I'm here in the Communist Republic of New York City, living under Mamdani here. I say that facetiously because I do empathize with the people who voted for him, meaning they're hurting. Their rent is too much. They're struggling. I'm not going to get mad at the people. I don't think what he's proposing is a solution. And I think he's learning very quickly that we don't have the budget to do free busing and free trains and all the things that he wants to do.
Right.
But it's, this third way that we often talk about with Bitcoin, most people still think Bitcoin is a scam. So when you think about the sort of framework that needs to be built out for people still in terms of what the future might look like, and this idea of even teaching personal responsibility, teaching people how to hold Bitcoin and all this kind of stuff as a way to, I don't know, just enter this next phase, this part of the fourth turning into the next turning, the first turning. It's a I don't know. There's going to be a lot of anxiety. I don't think this is going to be smooth. And with AI, I don't think, as you said, it's constantly right around the corner, but it doesn't always do exactly what we think it's going to do. So I think not reacting to every headline about how AI is going to change the world or kill us all tomorrow, whatever that is, just maybe take a deep breath and just sort of, again, maybe think about the ways in which you're providing value and how you can continue to do so, even in a world where AI proliferates.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there, Frank. I think it's how can you provide value in a world where AI can do a lot of those same things? So where can you provide value that AI currently can? And that might be your lane going forward, because God forbid they start making AI show hosts. I'm screwed. I'm gonna have to start an OnlyFans or something. It's not looking good. No one's buying that. All right, Frank, we're going to take a quick break here at Roxom TV News. When we're back, Frank and I are going to be chatting about our Bitcoin story of the hour. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV coming your way right after this.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. From cartel corridors in Mexico to encrypted wallets bouncing transactions across borders in seconds, drug trafficking networks are upgrading their financial playbooks. A Bloomberg investigation reports that criminal groups are increasingly shifting portions of their money laundering operations into crypto, often using stablecoins as the preferred rail. Now, instead of relying only on bulk cash smuggling or shell companies, proceeds are being converted through peer-to-peer brokers into digital assets that can move globally in minutes. The appeal is speed and mobility. Cash gets swapped for crypto, crosses borders instantly, and sits outside traditional banking systems. Blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis have documented the rise in illicit crypto flows, with stablecoins playing a central role due to liquidity and global accessibility. Once funds are on-chain, they can be split across wallets, routed through multiple addresses, and eventually cashed out through OTC desks or third-party accounts. Investigators stress that public blockchains are traceable. The complication is not the ledger, it is the human layer, brokers, facilitators, and cash handlers operating across jurisdictions. TRM Labs data shows that illicit crypto activity has reached record nominal levels, but still represents a small fraction of total crypto volume. And that context matters. The overwhelming majority of global money laundering still flows through traditional fiat systems and physical cash. And for viewers at home, this is not about whether crypto can be abused. Any financial tool can be abused. It's about how regulators and law enforcement respond without crippling legitimate use. Good people use crypto. Bad people also use crypto. The same has been true of every financial innovation in history. And here's my take on it. Every time criminals touch crypto, the headline becomes, "Crypto is the problem." Meanwhile, the global banking system launders hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and somehow that never becomes "shut down dollars." Cartels are not using stablecoins because crypto is magical. They're using them because they're fast. Criminals adopt whatever moves money efficiently. That was cash, then shell companies. Now, sometimes it's stablecoins. But here's the part people are conveniently ignoring. Public blockchains leave a trail. Suitcases of cash do not. So yes, law enforcement has a real challenge adapting, but pretending crypto invented money laundering is like blaming email for fraud. The technology is neutral. The real question is whether regulators can target bad actors without crushing innovation for everyone else. Because if we're honest, the largest money laundering network on earth is still called the global fiat system. We're bringing Frank back in. Frank, what do you make of this? We got drug dealers are trying to use stable coins now, and now they're being, it's what we've seen before. So a bad actor uses a tool and it co-opts the entire narrative. Is that what we're seeing here? Because it certainly feels like it.
What were people using to pay Jeffrey Epstein and all that kind of stuff? I don't think it was crypto. I think they were just using dollars and maybe other fiat currencies. So
yeah.
Again, the technology itself, monetary technology, whether it's crypto or banking rails or cash, it's all neutral. Depends who's doing what with it. And as you said, these public blockchains, there's a public record. The other thing that often doesn't get discussed, and I'm actually surprised to hear that the cartels are using stablecoins, because stablecoins can be frozen. Tether especially. Tether works very closely with the FBI. And I'm not saying that to throw shade at them or anything else. That's a fact. They say it themselves. They're very public about that. So I think what would be sort of interesting here is if the powers that be on whatever end, whether it's someone on this, within the countries the cartels operate or in the United States, contacts the authorities and say, hey, we need you to freeze these funds. We suspect that it's the cartels using them. That would actually be interesting to me, because now it's, do the cartels continue using it? Do they continue to use something that they know can be traced that easily? Can be stopped that easily. And I think that's the bigger part that I don't really get, especially when people are complaining about this. The US government is obviously very happy that stablecoins exist, because in a way they sort of want to export inflation or get a bigger network. I'll put it a different way. Expand Metcalfe's law, the network effects of the dollar, so that inflation isn't as acute. And so they kind of want these dollars out there. But then on the same level, you're complaining that bad people are using them. Well, we know bad people are going to use them, but it often doesn't get sort of discussed in the same breath that these things can be frozen basically very, very, very easily. I guess this is probably, in terms of liquidity, the only thing they can use. I can't imagine right now drug cartels using like Lightning, layer 2 on top of Bitcoin to do this. I don't think that liquidity is there, though. Shout out to the team that did the first $1 million Lightning transaction. I think it was this week. It was, I don't know if it was Voltage or someone behind it. So that liquidity might be showing up there. But it's not there yet, and the powers that be can stop this. And in this regard, I think the word crypto, it's kind of sometimes too broad of a term, because some of it is permissionless. Obviously, Bitcoin is permissionless. Maybe some other of the, the Moneros of the world or whatever. But this stuff, the tokens built on top of it, the Tethers of the world, the USDCs of the world, this is very permissioned technology. It has less permissions necessary than maybe a traditional banking system going from bank to bank, but it's still permission technology. I mean, there's terms of use for USDC. You can't spend USDC at like a gun store or at, there's a few different things. I remember reading this. There were some exclusions to it. So one thing to keep in mind with this is that I think the powers that be have more power over this than they purport to, and also they also have more power over the banking industry than they purport to. I think sometimes maybe they don't have that much of an issue if millions or whatever it is, hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing over these rails. Yeah, sure. Like in the news, they say they don't really love it that because it's narco terrorists or whatever doing it. But I think that they do like the idea that hundreds of millions of dollars are being used kind of in general. So I'm not trying to get too spicy on the show, but I think that this tension often doesn't get discussed with the proper nuance.
Oh, you can get as spicy as you want, Frank. I'm here for the heat. But one thing that I thought was interesting about this was that they were talking, we've seen it time and again in the crypto industry with Bitcoin, with stable coins, with shit coins. It seems like we get bad actors that use them as a tool, and then the public, the idea of what they are gets kind of co-opted in the view of the public. So, drug dealers are using this, it must be a bad thing. However, this story also says it's like, hey, drug dealers are using this because the speed and efficiency is off the charts. So it's like, why does John Q. Public only focus on like the bad things, that it's a tool being used by drug cartels rather than like, hey, this is a way more efficient monetary system that can transfer money cheaply and faster than anything we've seen before? Why do you think it is that we always hang on to the bad part of it rather than like focusing on like, hey, they're using this because it's literally a better system? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the bigger question there is like, why do people vote for things like the Patriot Act and other systems that surveil them and everything else? Yeah, I think a lot of people prioritize, maybe they want to optimize for their safety, quote unquote, versus their freedom. And I don't even say that to be like Captain American Eagle flying in the background or whatever. Like that's not my point here. I just think there's some level of, well, we want the powers that be to go after the bad guys. I don't want bad guys doing things to whatever. So it's, without a full understanding of the technology or the fact that bad guys do things with whatever technology they can get their hands on. So I think it's, I don't think people think too deeply about this stuff. I think the news sort of primes us to react emotionally to it. Like, oh, look at this, and then you have to think, well, what am I being primed to dislike here? What's actually happening? But I don't think many people sort of take that extra step, that extra thought. They just sort of think, well, stop the bad guys from doing bad things. And if they're using this as a tool, then we have to stop this thing as a tool and permanently associate this tool with bad guys. So it's a little disappointing, but I think it's just, again, not trying to be too whatever, but like maybe a little bit more critical thinking, a little bit more like stop, take a deep breath, think through this a little bit more. That might help in some of the assessments of these cases.
I mean, that might help for the world, a little critical thinking. That's really what it comes down to, right? Because like if you look at like the politics in play right now, and this is where critical thinking would really help all of us here. It's like, love him or hate him. We got Trump in office right now, but it's like you either love everything he does or you hate everything he does.
That's
and
it.
We're not allowed to be like, oh, there are some good things, but there are also some bad things. Like, when did we as a country go away from just deciding that we can choose some things are good and some are bad, rather than just having to blanket statement, it's either all or nothing? Like, why is that? Is that because politics now are about just ultimate winning rather than what's ultimately best for the country? Like, it's crazy.
I think there's two things that come to mind. One, Vivek Ramaswamy, who was originally he was in the primaries to become the Republican candidate against Trump, but then came on to support Trump. I interviewed him and I've watched a number of interviews with him, and he consistently says like, look, I actually don't agree with Trump on everything, and that's normal. It would actually be weird if we did agree on everything.
Yeah.
And I think taking a little bit more of that approach, and it doesn't mean you have to say it in a sort of like, you could just simply say like, okay, on these points, like I think a lot of Bitcoiners were happy to have a president who at least wasn't going to be antagonistic towards the industry. They were happy to have that, while at the same time, they may have issues with certain things. I mean, I'll say it personally, I don't like what I saw with ICE in Minneapolis, but at the same time, I'm grateful when I was in the White House and, being able to ask questions about Bitcoin, very grateful that that's the case. And I think with all people, that's just the way things are. Some people are going to do things you like, some people are going to do things you don't like. Obviously, with the president, I think what happens is that people are inherently, I think, tribal, especially when they're not necessarily thinking critically.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily tribal along the lines of principles. They tend to be tribal along the lines of like hierarchy, the person, the head of their team, if you will. So what I would
Yeah.
love to see is more people say like, well, this is my principle. I believe in transacting freely. I believe in the Second Amendment, whatever it is, and then say, okay, well, in some cases, the person seems to be upholding this principle or doing things in accordance with it. In some cases, they're not. But what ends up being the case, I think, is just like, I'm on Team Trump, let's own the libs, or vice versa, Trump derangement syndrome, and everything he does is terrible. And it's a really, I'll give one example of this that really blew my mind. So I went to the arraignment of Nicolas Maduro in the Southern District of New York. I wanted to see him with my own eyes, having lived in Venezuela. And I show up and there's a protest happening outside of the courthouse. And I'm watching it and I'm like, I don't believe this is real. And it's Venezuelans chanting USA, waving a Trump for King flag, and Americans saying free Venezuela, put Nicolas Maduro back in power. The USA is bad. I was like, I'm done. I'm over. Like
Yeah.
I can't do it anymore. Like I give up. I'm not going to try to apply logic anymore. But I think what ends up happening is just like people have chosen their sides. They've abandoned critical thinking. But again, this also happens more in times where uncertainty is high, where people are scared. So it's not that I
Yeah.
don't have empathy and I'm not trying to throw shade at people, but I do think like a deep breath, wait 30 seconds, think through it a little bit would tend to help. And then I think though it's uncomfortable, maybe saying, okay, maybe I voted for Trump or I like Trump, but I don't really like some of this stuff that's going on. I think if you say that without being attacking or anything else, I think eventually some of that message will get back to him. And I think if Trump does anything, he does pay attention to what people think and what people say on a certain level, especially if that's some of his followers saying, I'm not really a fan of some of this stuff that I'm seeing. So, but it's a matter of how we do it. If it's snarky, own the libs or do the, if it's, any of that kind of stuff, it's just going to make people retreat further into their corners. But if we can talk with a little bit more consideration, I think a little bit more nuance, then I think it can have an effect that maybe an effect beyond what we could even anticipate.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Frank. A lot of this just comes down to how we're choosing to communicate with each side of the aisle, right? Because if you come at it from a dismissive, everything they're doing is wrong, nobody's going to listen to you. And
No.
I've had this happen on some videos I've made where I've had, the Trump crowd comes out and they're like, you got that Trump derangement syndrome, don't you, son? And I'm like, well, I just think Trump derangement syndrome is when you blindly agree with everything he does in the face that some of these things are freaking crazy, like ripping kids away from their parents with ICE, like. You can like what he does as a whole, but still dislike some of those other things. That doesn't make you not Republican or not a Trump supporter. It makes you a rational, critical thinking human being. I think critical thinking 2026. I want to make red hats like that. Make America smart again. Let's do it, Frank. I'm going to talk to you after the show. We're going to get this line started here. But I think actually that brings us up to about our time for this this morning, Frank. But I want to thank you so much for joining in last minute. It's always such a treat getting to sit down and chat with you and pick your brain. So I certainly appreciate you popping in this morning. And Frank, you're doing God's work out there yourself. You're always breaking great stories. What do you got on tap right now? And where can our audience go check out what you're working on currently?
Actually, I appreciate you asking. I'll be releasing this tomorrow morning. I'm going back to doing more of speaking with people on the ground in conflict zones. So I'm releasing a talk with somebody from Iran tomorrow, someone who was actually imprisoned for 2 years by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, who's also a digital rights activist and a Bitcoin educator on the ground in Iran. He no longer lives in the country. He had to flee. But we had a real long talk around why this revolution happened, how it was part of it was women not wanting to wear hijabs and wanting to be free, but why it was much bigger than that. And so I'll be releasing that tomorrow. It's a podcast called New Renaissance Capital. If you follow me on X at Frank Corva, you'll see the link to that. But I'm going to be diving deeper on that. I have another story coming out about Bitcoin adoption in a slum or the largest slum in all of Africa, in Kenya. So diving into the places where Bitcoin, I think, is needed most and starting with the human story, starting with the problem, trying to talk about what the issue is, and then in what ways Bitcoin is helping to alleviate some of the issues on the ground in these places. So that's what I got on tap right now.
Oh, I love that, Frank. You really are doing God's work because it's those human stories that really, I think, connect people with the importance of Bitcoin. We always talk about policy and these bigger picture things, but it's those human to human things that I think really, resonate with people ultimately and get them to be more willing to kind of change their current point of view and being more open toward alternative viewpoints. So you're doing God's work out there. We appreciate you. We appreciate you coming in, Frank, and we can't wait to see you again real soon, my friend. Thanks for dropping in.
Appreciate it, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers. All right, gang, that's a wrap for our Wednesday edition here at Roxom TV News. As always, thanks so much for stopping in with us. If you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your doom scrolling. And we will be back tomorrow, Thursday, same time, same place, same top stories right here, 8 a.m. Pacific, here at Roxom TV. So until then, you boys and girls have a safe, happy, and well-informed Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow to do it all over again. Take care. See you Thursday, gang.